Hello, everyone. My name is Sharnice Peters. I'm a Policy Program Analyst for the Division of Energy Assistance within the Office of Community Services. On behalf of OCS, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar providing a 60-minute training for the fiscal year 2021 LIHEAP Household Report Long Form. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torkelson of Verve Associates and Dan Bausch from Apprise. Today's webinar is the first of two webinars that will review the reporting requirements for the fiscal year 2021 Household Report Long Form. Today's webinar has four purposes. First, this webinar will furnish an overview of fiscal year 2021 Household Report, including the background and main elements of the report. Second, this webinar will explain the approach for reporting on households assisted with supplemental federal LIHEAP funds, including LIHEAP CARES Act funds, and/or LIHEAP American Rescue Plan Act funds. Third, we will review examples of different reporting scenarios based on different ways that grantees may have used their supplemental LIHEAP funds. And finally, this webinar will highlight key reminders for the household report and ways to avoid common reporting issues. The Household Report Long Form applies to all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and select territories. This webinar will focus only on the long form and is intended for coordinators and any staff of contractors who work on preparing the long form report. The second webinar that will be conducted later this month will provide a more extensive line-by-line review of the report intended for newer coordinators and staff, or those who want more detailed review of the reporting requirements. Finally, before I hand it over to Melissa, I'd like to say that we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope that this training is helpful as you prepare to complete your household report for fiscal year 2021. Melissa, please take it away.
Thanks, Sharnice. So good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is 60 minutes long, and we'll be reviewing key information, and we'll be providing a detailed review of the form changes for FY 2021. The slides for today's webinar are available for download now under the handout section of the GoToWebinar sidebar. And this webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube training channel. Next slide, please. So if you have questions today as we walk through the webinar, you're encouraged to ask them as you have them by typing them into the question box on the sidebar. And we have a little picture here to show you where that is. Your submitted questions will be reviewed and responded to at the end of the webinar. And if there's not time to get to your question, or if you have a very detailed question that's really related to your particular state, we will respond via an email. Next slide. I'm not going to walk through this, but this is a handy slide for folks who might not make it to the webinar today, or if you want to go back and review the slides. This gives you some of the, it's almost like a table of contents or an index on key topics that we're going to be covering and where you can find those in the slide deck. But we're going to start today with a poll. And so if all of you could give us just a couple minutes and answer this question: which of the following best describes your role and experience with the LIHEAP Household Report? And your options are that you're a LIHEAP coordinator that is experienced with the Household Report, you're a newer LIHEAP coordinator with limited experience with the Household Report, you're a state LIHEAP staff member who works on the Household Report, like an IT person, for example, you're a contractor who helps complete the report, or you are none of the above. And Connor is going to administer this and tell us what the results are.
Give everyone just a few more seconds here. All right, it looks like, oh, okay, more filtering in. Okay. It looks like they've slowed down. I'm gonna go ahead and close it out now.
All right, so it looks like there's a nice variety of folks on the call today. About a quarter of you have experience About a third of you are state LIHEAP staff members who work on this, and the rest fall in newer or contractor, none of the above. So I think there's going to be something for everyone in this webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's going to start with an overview of the household report.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Bausch. I'm with the prize. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for this webinar. So the LIHEAP household report has been a long-standing report for the LIHEAP program since the early days of the program in the 1980s. The report collects very important information that allows OCS and HHS to document and to report information about LIHEAP outcomes, which is a requirement contained within the LIHEAP statute. There's two main types of data that the household report focuses on. It asks grantees to report information on all the households that received LIHEAP assistance, that received a benefit during the specific fiscal year. And it also asks for information on the number of households that applied for different types of LIHEAP assistance. The data that you report in the household report are published in the annual LIHEAP report to Congress that documents the program activity for each fiscal year. That data is also taken and used in the LIHEAP data warehouse, where you can access it and look at your data going back to 2001. And it's also used to respond to requests that come in from the administration or from Congress. Next slide. So we're going to step back and talk about some of the changes that happened to the household report last year for the fiscal year 2020 report. The household report for a number of years looked the same way, and it asked you to report information on households that got heating assistance, cooling assistance, crisis assistance, for example. And then last year, HHS revised the household report in response to the release of supplemental LIHEAP funds, specifically the CARES Act funds that were released during fiscal year 2020. And that change was made to allow HHS to be able to report about the impact of those supplemental funds. So last year, for each item collected in the report, there were two lines. There was a line to report the total households, and there was a second line to report the subset of households that was assisted with LIHEAP CARES Act funds. And so you can see a picture of that on the screen. That first line for heating assistance, all households. Second line for the subset that got LIHEAP CARES Act assistance. And then there was a third line that you could see but did not have open fields for you to enter information. And that was reserved in the event that additional supplemental LIHEAP funds would be released by Congress. So that was last year's FY 2020 report. As you all know, this year in March, the President signed into law the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, or ARPA. And within that legislation, Congress appropriated approximately $4.5 billion in supplemental funds for LIHEAP. HHS released those funds in May, so partway through fiscal year 2021. And you may have used all of those funds during fiscal year 2021. You may have used some of them, or you may have obligated none of them and reserved them for obligation now during fiscal year 2022. The Dear Colleague letter that announced those funds, as the Dear Colleague letter did with the prior supplemental CARES funds, included language to notify grantees that they would need to track, account for, and report on those funds. Next slide, please. So the release of those ARPA funds meant that grantees may have provided LIHEAP assistance to households during fiscal year 2021 with 3 different categories or types of federal LIHEAP funds. You may have assisted households with your regular LIHEAP funds. Those are your block grant funds and reallotment funds that come on an annual basis from HHS. You may have had LIHEAP CARES Act funds that you received in 2020 that you used to assist households in 2021. And you may have assisted households with the ARPA funds. And you may have assisted households with any mix or combination of these different categories. So for the 2021 report we're focused on today, with the release of the ARPA funds during fiscal year 2021, HHS has opened up the third line in the household report for each item that was reserved in last year's FY20 report. So that means for each item, each type of assistance in the household report, now there are going to be 3 lines. Line 1 and line 2 are the same as they were last year. Line 1 is the total households that received that type of assistance. Line 2 is the subset that received that assistance with LIHEAP CARES Act funds. And line 3 is the subset that was assisted with LIHEAP ARPA funds. So you'll see that in OLDC, you'll see the labels that are shown on the screen here. And the reporting of this information is going to assist HHS in being able to understand the impact of each of those sources of funding, each of those categories in serving eligible households. Okay, so to summarize, for FY21's the FY 2021 household report, there's no changes to the overall form structure or the sections from last year. You'll still need to report on the total households that received each type of assistance and the subset of households that were assisted with some amount of CARES Act funds. The change from last year's FY20 report is that you'll also be asked in that third line to report on any households that were assisted in part or in full with LIHEAP ARPA funds when they received their benefit. And that's the third line. As with last year's report, this report should be submitted through the OLDC system that's available on the Grant Solutions website. And now Melissa is going to go over some of the key concepts for reporting on the household report.
Thanks, Dan. Let's start by looking at the data that you're going to need to complete this report. This starts with the type of assistance each household received and the funds used. So regular assistance types like heating and cooling, crisis assistance types like winter, summer, year-round, or other, and the other can include things like emergency equipment repair and replacement, weatherization, as well as nominal benefits. This is sometimes referred to as the SNAP Heat and Eat program. And notice that it says and funds used, as you heard from Dan, and you'll hear later again, you need all of these benefit types, but you also need to know which funding source they came from, whether it be regular LIHEAP, the ARPA funds, or the CARES Act funds. The household poverty interval, these are the assigned poverty intervals based on the household poverty level, as well as a vulnerable household member information. So whether a member of the household is elderly, disabled, a young child under 6. We also have optional places on the form for grantees to report young children under age 3 and young children ages 3 to 5. There are two, as Dan mentioned, there are kind of 2 sections of the report. The first looks at assisted households. These are households where a client received LIHEAP assistance using federal LIHEAP funds during the federal fiscal year, October 1st to September 30th. You're going to want to report on households, not the total people in the household, individuals, or the head of households, but households. And you're not going to want to count approved households that did not receive assistance. Some of you work on different program year schedules. Some of you may approve someone but not pay them until the next year. Some of you have a process where approval and payment are separate. We're not looking at who was approved for a benefit. We're looking at who actually received a benefit within that time frame, October 1 to September 30th, regardless of when your own program year is. The other sections of the report look at applicant households, and these are households where a client applied for LIHEAP assistance during the federal fiscal year, October 1 to September 30th. This may include people who applied but were not assisted. The definition of applicant is not defined by the LIHEAP statute. So some of you keep track of everyone who fills out an application or calls to request LIHEAP. Some of you only track people where the application process was started and then it was denied or voided for some reason. That definition of applicant households is up to you. Just know that this is a more comprehensive number that looks at both assisted as well as applicants. Next slide, please. So for the household report, you're always reporting on households, not the instances in which a household receives benefits. So this means that for each line of the report, household is only counted once in that line. And here's an example. The Johnson household received 2 year-round crisis benefits, one in the winter and one in the spring. While they receive 2 benefits, they're just one household and should only be counted once when reporting the count of households in year-round crisis. Households should be reported for each applicable type of assistance they receive. So for example, the Lee household received 1 heating benefit and 1 cooling benefit during the year. This household will be reported once under heating assistance and once under cooling assistance lines. Now, many of you have heard, and some of you struggle a little bit with this idea of an unduplicated count. So we've already talked about the fact that you're going to report households in the area where they received assistance, whether it's heating or cooling or weatherization or crisis. But there are 2 lines in the report that ask you to give an unduplicated count across different categories. The bill payment assistance line requires you to report the count of households that received at least 1 benefit used to pay a share of their energy bills or utility deposits. It does not include assistance for weatherization or equipment assistance. The any type of assistance line reports the total count of households that received any LIHEAP dollars. This might include bill payment assistance, weatherization, equipment assistance, or other types of crisis assistance. And if you look at this example here, you'll see that household A received a heating benefit, so they're counted in the heating line. Household B received a heating benefit and a cooling benefit, so you're going to see them counted once in heating and once in cooling. And household C received weatherization, so they're going to be counted in the weatherization line. But when we get down to these unduplicated counts, we're going to be looking at the number of households. There were 3 households that received some kind of LIHEAP, heating, cooling, weatherization. And so we're going to put 3 households in the any type of assistance line, households A, B, and C. In the bill payment assistance line, we saw that household A and B got heating or cooling benefits. And so these 2 households, A and B, are going to be counted in the bill payment assistance line. Household C is not counted in this line because weatherization isn't bill payment assistance. So next, we're going to walk through some general reporting reminders. And these are things that we run into every year with grantees in terms of key issues or concerns or mistakes that we see or errors when people submit their reports. So we're just going to kind of walk through this. The first is that you're going to report for each type of assistance. And we already mentioned this is reporting households that received assistance during the federal fiscal year, which is October 1, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. And some of you, once again, have different program years, January to December, July to June. And so it's very important that when you are gathering data from your system, that you're gathering it for these dates, not your program year. This includes households served with prior year LIHEAP funds. And what that means is that many of you carry over funds, they may be obligated or specifically carry over funds from one year to the other. we're not terribly interested in what year's funding you were using. We're interested in the type of funding. Was it regular LIHEAP, ARPA, CARES? And we're interested in who got money. So those are the two things that are really important. If you indicated that you plan to provide a particular type of assistance in your FY 2021 model plan, we expect to see households reported under that type of assistance in your household report. So if you told OCS that you planned on running a cooling program in FY 2021, in your model plan, we would expect to see households reported under the cooling component in your household report. In Section 2, we expect grantees to only report households that fall within the gross income thresholds specified in their model plans. And these, just as a reminder, the poverty intervals that you assign to each household should be used or done using the 2020 HHS poverty guidelines, which we have a link here for you to take a look at. Our reminder number 2 is about collecting and matching data from program partners. Many of you may not directly capture information for your crisis component or weatherization assistance in your primary LIHEAP systems. So for example, some of you have DOE or another department administer your LIHEAP weatherization program, or some of you may use subgrantees or local agencies to administer your crisis or emergency equipment programs, and they may use different systems to track these benefits. In this situation, you will all need to obtain household level data from these subgrantees or program partners who track this information. This kind of very specific household level data is needed to confirm an accurate count of households that received any type of LIHEAP assistance, because you're going to match those households that might have received that crisis or weatherization assistance to households from your system that received other types of LIHEAP assistance. Now, we have templates that we've developed and have helped states to customize, to hand to their partners to say, here's the data we need from you, in order to complete our required reporting. And if you'd like to talk about this or see a copy of those, please give us a call, because we're willing to help not only develop that template and get that data exchange going, but help you to incorporate that data back into the information from your own system. Reminder number 3, reporting any type of vulnerability. So in Section 3, column D, you're going to notice that grantees must report an unduplicated count for each type of assistance with at least one vulnerable member. So households with multiple vulnerabilities are only going to be counted once under each column. Let me give you an example. Let's say a household comes in for heating that has 2 disabled members and a member that is age 5 or under. In the heating line, they'll be counted once. In disabled column, let me rephrase that. In the heating line, they'll be counted once in the disabled column. They'll be counted once in the young child column, and they'll be counted once in the elderly, disabled, or young child. You should not add across elderly plus disabled plus young child, because the households can have more than one type of vulnerability. And so when we get this report, we're going to be looking to see that the count is less than the sum of elderly, disabled, and young child households from each row of assistance. Once again, we can help you with this if there's issues with unduplicating this count, but it's really important that you're not just summing across the row. And finally, there's a place to record notes, and you all should be using this pretty liberally. This is a place to provide the context about unique aspects of your program. It's also the place to explain why you may be getting warning messages in OLDC. Some of you are going to get warning messages or errors when you try to submit your data, and you're going to check it and you're going to say, but this is right. Anytime you get a warning error and you've checked it and you know it's right, you should be automatically kind of cued to submit a note that explains this. Otherwise, a prize will call you and ask you to explain it. All the notes are reviewed. They provide very useful context, And they also allow for better understanding the reported data. And we use this information to help provide context when your data is submitted in the report to Congress. So don't be afraid to use this notes box because it's really valuable in helping to understand your data. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's going to talk about reporting for supplemental funding.
So I'm going to go over again the approach that the form uses for having 3 lines for each type of assistance, and we're gonna talk about this a lot just to make sure it's clear and answers any questions you have. So this is a picture again of the different heating assistance lines that are in the first section of the household report. The first line is meant for you to report the total households that received that type of assistance, in this case heating assistance. This is the same information that you've had to report in the past, and that's been reported going back years and years. The second line is a subset of that first line. It's the households that when they received their heating assistance, that benefit was paid in full or in part with CARES Act dollars. And then the third line is the subset of households that were assisted with the LIHEAP Arpa funding. And that's the new development for the 2021 report. Okay, so as I mentioned, that first line should be total households that received the assistance with federal funds. If you're a state that uses or leverages other sources of funds, has your program connected to state funding, remember for the household report, it's just reporting on the federal LIHEAP program and households that receive federal LIHEAP dollars. So this is where you'd report households regardless of which type of federal dollars they received for that type of assistance. The key point here is this is consistent with what you've had to do in the past, and to remember that this is not regular block grant funds only. This is meant to be comprehensive of all the different federal funding sources, including CARES and ARPA. Next slide. So the second line, that's for reporting households that are in the subset that received CARES. For this slide, the real key point is that these households that you break out as having received CARES and report, they're not only reported on this line, they also are still included in that first line, because that first line is a total across all funding sources. So line 2 is a subset of line 1. And this is going to really vary for each of you, because some of you may have used and spent your CARES funds in FY20, and you might not have households to report, or you might have a small number that received CARES. Some of you may have used most of your CARES funding to serve households during 2021, and you'll have larger numbers to report. So just keep in mind what you know about how you used your CARES funds when you're reviewing your report. The third line is the new line for reporting on households that receive the assistance, the type of assistance from the American Rescue Plan Act funding that you used. With this line, as well as with the CARES line, if you had a household you assisted with cooling assistance, for example, and they received a cooling assistance benefit of $200, and part of that $200 was regular funding, and part of it was from the ARPA funds, you'd want to count. You'd still want to report it here. It doesn't have to be entirely paid for by ARPA funds. It can be partially funded. The key point here is these households, again, are still households that should be included in that line 1 total, and that this is a subset of line 1. Now, if you're a state that didn't use your ARPA funds to provide benefits during 2021, then throughout this report, you'll have 0 households to report on the third line for this year. But you need to keep in mind that when you do use those funds to serve households during the current fiscal year, 2022, you'll need to be able to report on those households for next year's household report. So as I said, the relationship of the lines, if a household counts in the household counts in the first line should be greater than or equal to the counts that are in line 2. And line 1 should also be greater than or equal to the counts that you report in the third line for ARPA. If you combine your CARES and your ARPA funds to provide a type of assistance to households, like a supplemental pandemic benefit or a special crisis benefit, then those households that receive assistance with both sources of funds would be on all of the lines. Households aren't just reported in line 2, and that means they're not in line 3 or vice versa. It depends on what source of funds touch the household to provide them with that assistance. We're going to look at some more detailed examples in a couple minutes that'll help visualize this. So there's a few different ways that you may have used your supplemental LIHEAP funds during 2021. One way is you may have provided extra supplemental benefits to households that already received assistance from your regular LIHEAP funds. Second way is you might have served more households by targeting the ARPA or the CARES funds to serve additional households that otherwise may have not been served. And third, you might have used the funds to start a new program component or a new benefit type. So depending on how you use those funds is going to impact how your report looks. So focusing in on the new line and identifying households that received the ARPA funds, for the lines in the report that ask you to report about assisted households, that's sections 1, 2, 3, and 6, which is an optional section. For those sections, you're focusing in on including any household that received a benefit paid with ARPA. And so if you expended your ARPA funds to give benefits during FY 2021, then you're going to need to count and report those households. If you didn't, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have 0 on line 3, but you'll need to keep in mind that in next year's report for FY 2022, you'll have to report those households. Next slide. Sections 4 and 5 in the household report are where you report the information on the number of applicants for each type of assistance. You might not have provided assistance using your ARPA funds during 2021, but you may have started receiving applicants. And so this section may have households reported in either case. As Melissa mentioned earlier, when it comes to reporting the applicant information, there's flexibility because each state defines applicant in a different way, and your system might be set up to record information for households that apply for LIHEAP in varying ways. So there's a few different approaches you can take to reporting the applicant data for the LIHEAP ARPA households. One way you could do this is if you had a separate benefit or a separate application process related to receiving assistance from those ARPA funds, then you can use your system and look at the number of applications for that specific form or for that specific benefit and report the information using that approach. If you don't have a distinct application form or process that you used to have households apply for an ARPA funded benefit, then there's a few approaches you could take. You could report the total number of households that applied for that type of assistance, which would mean repeating the information that you have in the first line. Or you could report the households that applied for that assistance based on the time, a certain time frame when you began issuing the ARPA funded benefits. So the key thing to stress for you on reporting the applicant information is that there's flexibility in how to report this, and you should look at your approach used last year for the CARES reporting in FY20 to see if you can follow a similar approach or if you may need to change it. Okay, we're going to look at some examples together of how you would report based on different scenarios that you may have used. So the first scenario is this grantee or this state, state X, used their supplemental funds to provide supplemental benefits. So the right side of your screen is a table designed to look like the household report. So you can see at the top there, we're focusing in on the number of assisted households, and there's the 3 heating assistance lines. Then in the middle, there's lines for some crisis assistance components. Then towards the bottom, there's weatherization, and at the very bottom, there's the any type of LIHEAP assistance lines. So grantee X provided 5,000 households with heating assistance using their regular funds. So for the household report, there aren't any lines for just reporting regular funds. So I'm not going to enter anything yet in the table in column B. Okay, when the ARPA funds were issued, this grantee decided to use those funds to provide those 5,000 households that received heating assistance with the regular LIHEAP funds. They used their ARPA funds to give them an extra supplemental benefit. So I'm going to put 5,000 in line 3, which is heating assistance households that were assisted with ARPA funding, because those 5,000 households received that supplemental benefit. This grantee also carried over some of their CARES Act funds from 2021, or had some remaining that they used to issue benefits. And so they decided to use those funds to provide a second supplemental payment to 500 households that had the highest LIHEAP energy burdens. So they had remaining CARES funds, and they expended them to give 500 households an extra supplemental payment. So we're going to put 500 on line 2 for CARES Act funding that was used to provide heating assistance. So remember, in total, we're talking about 5,000 households that received heating assistance. All 5,000 got a supplemental benefit. 500 of them got a second supplemental benefit. But they're all from the same pool of 5,000 households. So we're putting 5,000 households in line 1 that receive heating assistance. In this example, this grantee didn't use their supplemental LIHEAP funds, their CARES funds, or their ARPA funds for weatherization or for crisis assistance. So we're going to put 0 on those lines for year-round crisis and weatherization. However, they did serve 2,000 households with crisis assistance and 500 with weatherization assistance, and they only used their regular funds, not their ARPA funds or CARES funds. So that means the total number of households that received year-round crisis assistance was 2,000, so we'll put that in line 7A, and 500 received weatherization, so we're going to put 500 in line 8. After they deduplicate their households and figure out how many households received any type of assistance, heating, crisis, weatherization, any type of assistance, the the number of unique households was 6,000. So we're putting 6,000 in line 11 for any type of LIHEAP assistance. So we know from what we went over earlier in the example that they used ARPA and CARES funds to provide supplemental benefits. And they didn't use them for crisis or weatherization, they just used them for heating. So line 12, any type of LIHEAP assistance with CARES is 500, the same as what's in line 2, because they only use their CARES funds to provide that extra benefit to those 500 households. And the same for line 13. Line 13 matches line 3 because that was the only way, they only used their ARPA funds to issue a supplemental heating assistance benefit to 5,000 households. Okay, that's one example. We're going to do a second one, and this is an example where a grantee serves new households using those supplemental funds. Okay, like in the last example, this grantee provided 5,000 households with heating assistance, but they decided to use their CARES and ARPA funds to target assistance to additional households that might otherwise not have been served by the program. So 3,000 households received heating assistance from the CARES Act funds. So we're going to put 3,000 on line 2. And 2,000 received heating assistance from the ARPA funds. So we're going to put 2,000 on line 3. Because the households additional households were targeted with those type of assistance, we know 5,000 received assistance first from regular funds, then another 3,000 from CARES, then another 2,000 from heating. 5,000 plus 3,000 plus 2,000 equals 10,000 households that received heating assistance. So we're putting 10,000 in line 1. So this is different than that last scenario because different households were served with each type of funding. This grantee decided not to use their CARES or ARPA funds for crisis assistance or for weatherization. So we're going to put 0 on the supplemental funding subset lines. But they did still provide crisis assistance and weatherization assistance using their regular LIHEAP funds. And so a total of 2,000 households received crisis assistance and 500 received weatherization. So we're putting those on the front line, the first lines for each of those categories. For any type of assistance, looking at the number of unique households, this grantee identifies that 10,500 received any type of LIHEAP assistance from any source of funding. But when we look at the CARES line and the ARPA line for any type of assistance, they only used their CARES and ARPA funds to serve households with heating assistance, to provide heating assistance benefits. So we're going to put the same numbers that are under heating assistance for CARES and ARPA under any type of LIHEAP assistance here in this example. Okay, the last example is this grantee decides to use their supplemental funds to start a new program component. Maybe they hadn't previously provided this assistance and now they're adding it. So this grantee decided to carry over all of their ARPA funds to FY 2022. So they did not provide any assistance to households during FY 2021 using the ARPA funds. So if that's you, then your report will look like this with zeros next to each of the American Rescue Plan Act lines. This grantee also didn't use their CARES to provide standard heating assistance, so we're putting 0 on line 2. And they but they did provide heating assistance to 7,000 households in total. It just happened that all 7,000 were served with their regular block grant funds. So we're going to put 7,000 on line 1. They did not use their CARES or ARPA funds to provide year-round crisis or weatherization, so we would put 0 on those lines. But they still served households with crisis and with weatherization just with their regular funds. So the total number of households we would fill into those lines, as is shown here. So how did they use their remaining CARES funds? In this example, they used them to start a new crisis assistance component that they called their COVID crisis program. So that's written in on line M. Let's imagine that they used it to serve 1,000 households. We would put 1,000 on both the CARES line and on the total line, since in total 1,000 received that new component they added. In this example, in order to get crisis or weatherization, a household needed to first have standard heating assistance. If that's the case, then line 11 is going to be 7,000, which matches line 1 because all households needed to get regular heating assistance first. Since they didn't use any of their ARPA funds to provide benefits during 2021, line 13 also gets a 0. And since they only used their CARES funds during 2021 for their new crisis COVID program, we would put the same number, 1,000 households here. So we're hoping that those examples are helpful, and we also have some recommendations for IT staff or people who are working with the data on the report. First, you want to check that you have the necessary fields to identify what type of benefit a household received and the type of funds used to provide that benefit. That's something that was needed last year for the FY20 report to report on the subset that received CARES. It's always good to check that your results agree with other information you know about how your funds were used during FY21 to double check the report. And as an example, here's one approach you could use as you're completing the report. You could generate the report looking just at total households, and that would be used to fill in the first line. So the number that got heating assistance, the number that got cooling. And then you could run your query or your report again after you've filtered down just to households that received CARES by using a field that would indicate that. And you could repeat that process again for households that received ARPA and take that approach. That's just one example of how you could do this. So now we're going to just talk quickly about submitting the report and some final reminders. And I'll turn it to Melissa.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'm going to move through this really pretty quickly, but once again, these slides are in the handout section. The preliminary household report is due tomorrow. This is the report grantees normally submit with their model plan. And this report can contain non-final or estimated data. So the important part is just getting it in. So make sure you submit it. We understand you're going to potentially make changes later, or probably make changes. The final report, though, is due Friday, December 31st. This must contain final data from your data tracking systems and program records. Once all data in the household report are final, grantees must select no in the response to the questions in the instructions section that ask, do the data below include estimated figures? You're also going to want to uncheck any estimated data checkboxes in sections 1 and 4. This is really important. It's a tiny little thing, but a lot of people miss it. So in the final report, make sure those boxes are unchecked and that you've checked no. You can always submit revisions to your reports later if corrections are needed. Next slide. Many of you have submitted an OLDC, so you know this, but we do have validation checks that are programmed in to give you warnings or error messages when we think something might not be right. Warning messages indicate that the data might be correct, but we want you to confirm it and provide additional explanation in the notes section. Fatal error messages, though, indicate inconsistent data, and they must be corrected before you're able to actually submit your report. So those need to be addressed right away. Apprise does even more checks after you submit the report in OLDC, and we will email you to alert you to any issues and ask any questions we need to understand your data. And when your report is confirmed as complete, your liaison will accept it in OLDC. If you later, once again, identify a correction or changes needed, you can submit a revision in OLDC. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but these slides are here if you want to hand these to your IT folks or whoever enters your data into OLDC, but it is a kind of lengthy process. You need to submit the form, you need to save it, validate, certify, and submit. And you also have to get it, the certification sometimes has to come from someone who may be very high up in your state or your organization. And so this can take time, and it's really important to allow yourself time to get it submitted in OLDC after you've completed your report. As Dan mentioned, there are no changes to the structure or sections for the FY 2021 report. For each type of assistance, you're still going to report on the total number of households who received types of LIHEAP assistance and the subset of households that were assisted with CARES Act fund in the second line. The only change is that you're going to now also report on the subset of households that were assisted with Arpa funds. Next slide. Once again, the estimated data is due tomorrow. The final is due on Friday, December 31st. And the steps to get it into OLDC can take some time, so make sure you leave yourself enough time to do that and still get it in by the deadline. If you receive validation messages that you just don't understand, or you're sure you're doing it right, but you just can't get past it in the system, please reach out to Apprise because we're here to help, and we can sometimes help you pretty quickly with something that might take you a little bit longer to figure out on your own. This is just some basic information about OLDC, how to log into the system, and where to go if you need help, both phone numbers and an email. And these are some really awesome resources to help you as you're moving through. The AT and instructions for this report, the link is here. The poverty guidelines that both Dan and I referenced in the presentation. We have a check before you submit document that helps you go through and take a look at where potential errors might be and get those fixed before you even submit it in an OLDC. And there's an entire page on the household report on the performance management website that gives you all of these resources, webinars, trainings, tools in one place. So that's the last link here on the page, and I encourage you to go visit that. So before I go to the poll here really quick, I just can't underscore this enough. I was a coordinator who was trying to do this report for several years, and I worked very many late nights trying to figure out something that a phone call would have potentially saved me a lot of time with. And so please reach out if you're banging your head against a wall about something and just can't figure it out. Don't waste a lot of time trying to figure it out yourself. Give us a call. We've probably helped another grantee with it and can give you a quick answer so that you can get this report done and submitted on time. So now let's just do a quick poll. How confident are you that you understand how to correctly complete the FY 2021 household report? Are you very, somewhat, not too, or not at all confident? I'll turn it over to Connor and Dan.
Connor's also putting together the questions that anyone has sent in. So if you have questions and you want to type them in now, we'll be going through questions right after this.
One more thing I have in my notes to make sure to remind everyone, if you are for some reason not able to get your reports in on time, it is very important that you request an extension from your liaison. And they'll usually ask you when you think you'll be able to get it in. So, you know, if you can write them and say, I need X number of weeks, or I need until X day to get this in, that's a really important thing for them. And it's also important when your state auditors come through and look at when you submitted your reports and if you got them in on time. Having written documentation that you requested an extension is really important.
Okay, it looks like the responses have stopped coming in, so I'm gonna close and share.
Okay. Well, we want to remind you, I think we need to go to the next slide, Connor. We want to remind you, if you're not that confident, that we have another webinar coming up later this month on the 30th, and that's going to be more detailed and go line by line. So if you're newer or want that detailed review, we'll be sending a registration email soon. Here is contact information if you have questions and would like to reach out to us. And I think we'll go to questions now.
So we've got a few. If folks want to continue to submit, that's great. Also, if you want to raise your hand, I should be able to see that and call on you if you'd rather speak it out loud. But we've got one here, Dan, that says, how should we report in a situation where CARES Act funds were used to provide a rearage relief in the form of supplemental payments to those households who also received benefits from regular funding? And Dan, I think that's similar to scenario one, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so, you know, the household report and the way you're asked to report, there's categories, there's heating assistance, there's cooling assistance, there's crisis assistance. So you need to report using those categories. So the first question is which category of assistance is this? Is this crisis assistance? It sounds like it's not necessarily, but it may be. Is it regular assistance? And then once you figured out the category, then you may need to include it with other households that you have in that category. Even if they're not receiving that specific kind of benefit, you might need to combine it with those other households. So there is a little bit of flexibility in figuring that out. But in the next webinar, we kind of go over what normally is heating assistance, what normally is cooling assistance, what are the criteria for crisis assistance. So that's something we'd recommend.
Okay, great. Another one, Dan, I think is similar. To confirm, in section 1, line 7, or like those lines under line 7 for crisis, if we serve the same households with LIHEAP crisis, that would be line 7A, CARES crisis, and Arpa crisis, we will add them together for the value in 7A. Then 7B and 7C will be also reported, but a subset of 7A, correct?
If you're serving the same households, so the same households got a benefit with regular assistance, and then they got an additional benefit with ARPA, for example, the number in the total line, the first line 7A, and the number in 7C would be the same. If you gave different households ARPA from households that got regular assistance, then line 7A will be different from line 7C. But if it's the same households getting multiple benefits, then the numbers would match across those 3 lines. You're only adding lines if you're only adding households lines if there's different households. So if you want to go over it more, you can reach out to us by email and we can kind of talk about it and make sure make sure we didn't describe it incorrectly.
Okay, another one here. Our IT department had a building fire Monday night. I have sent a request for an extension to our ACF contact due to the stall in gathering the information and have not heard back yet. Any thoughts on that, or what they should that person should expect, or anyone in a similar situation should expect if they haven't heard back from their ACF person but they need an extension?
Well, I'm really sorry to hear about that. That sounds pretty devastating. First, I'd say if you reached out, that's great. You know, sometimes you might want to try to reach out again and make sure that they received it. Sometimes things, you know, don't get there or get lost. We can help connect you if you need help being connected. But we encourage you to reach out, and if you need assistance, just reach out to us as well, and we'll be able to help with that. And especially if you need help now completing the report in some way based on what's happened, please also reach out to us, and we can see how we can assist you with that.
Okay, Dan, it's after 4, but there are a couple more questions. Should we continue on and folks?
Let's take, how about we do one or two more questions, and then if there's any we don't get to, we'll follow up with you by email.
Okay, so one is just, can you explain again the reporting for any type of assistance?
Yeah, so if one way to think about it is each row initially in the report, each item, there's heating assistance, there's cooling assistance, each type of assistance. You're counting households that receive that type of assistance. But then if you're providing multiple kinds of assistance to the same households, HHS is interested in knowing the count of unique households that receive assistance. So you need to use your household ID if you have a household ID in your data system, or use some information you have to identify the Johnson household or the Smith household, and be able to only count them once, even if they received multiple types of assistance. So that involves putting all your data together, having a way to identify households, and making sure the same household isn't counted twice when you're doing any type of assistance lines.
Okay, great. Another one here, Dan, is we tracked the CARES and ARPA spending, but our system isn't set up to track this for households. How should we approach this?
I'll take this one. So it's expected in this report that you should be able to identify households that received ARPA and CARES funds uniquely to be able to report on them. But if for some reason you didn't track them as well as you should have, we've seen grantees or advised grantees to try to find a solution. For example, looking at the dates of assistance, some of you used ARPA during a set period of time or issued supplemental benefits on a set date or dates. And so being able to go in and look at the date range may be able to help you separate those CARES or ARPA funds out separately. Another way is to look at benefit amounts. Many of you issued a supplemental benefit that was a kind of standard amount, or one uniform amount. Some of you are using ARPA to do rearages, for example, that are well above your normal benefit levels, and so that would be another way to distinguish between your regular LIHEAP assistance and those CARES and ARPA funds. But if you need help trying to kind of figure out how to count households that you may not have tracked as well as you would have liked to, please reach out and we'll help you think through that.
All right, great. Thanks, Melissa and Dan. Okay, that's all the questions I'm seeing right now, but as Dan and Melissa have both indicated, our contact information is on the slides. Those are in the handouts. We'll also be posting this video to the ACF YouTube channel at some point. So if you do have more questions, feel free to reach out. And again, if you do have those questions, it's probably a good idea to attend our upcoming webinar that goes into a little bit more detail on the household report. But I'm going to go ahead and end it now. So thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you all.